right, sports fans and lovers and haters of composition, I got another one in my arsenal of Change My Mind series, and I kind of overlooked an obvious topic as I was thinking of high engagement paper ideas. And this marks number 7 in the series, and it's an obvious one. So many kids within a certain demographic love this topic, and they debate it all the time without us even present. Change My Mind, Michael Jordan is the GOAT synthesis paper. So what I'll do is I'll start with a prompt and I'll unpack that with you, and then I'll walk you through how I wrote the entire paper for my kids, in which I either use my declarative or inverted thesis heuristic, and then I cobble together the body paragraphs with the syllogistic method heuristic, and then I tag a couple of conclusions on the end as well. So keep in mind, all the slides that you're going to see in this particular video are available for download, link below. And if you got any questions, drop me an email. My email is in the description as well. So here it is, all right, the prompt. Stephen Blake Crowder is at it again. He just rolled up to your high school with the following signage. Michael Jordan is the GOAT. Defend, challenge, qualify, refute, use a minimum of 3 sources. And I'll talk about those sources in just a second. So this one's interesting in the series because a lot of kids agree with me that Michael Jordan is the GOAT. I'm a child of the 90s, grew up watching Michael Jordan. My beloved Knicks got decimated by him a number of times. And I think in the debate that just unequivocally he's the best. In my exemplars, I'm going to say Wilt Chamberlain just so that the kids aren't stealing my thunder. In a couple of the introductions, I do espouse the Michael Jordan idea, but I go with a variety of athletes just to show kids how to do this. Before I jump in and get into my exemplars, please subscribe to the channel. It's called Kristian Kuhn, the Bob Ross of Composition. It is growing exponentially. So we're a week before the Super Bowl here. And I think I'm going to eclipse 20,000 subscribers by then. So it looks like I have the hottest YouTube channel out of all the ELA teachers that are doing what I'm doing. So it delights me. Thank you for the support. Spread the word far and wide to teachers, colleagues, students, and let's get this sucker growing even more. Now, in terms of the sources, I do not provide them for my students because there are so many angles in which you could go with this particular paper. It's endless directions that I want them to engage the research method a tad bit and find their own sources. My rule is this: find 5. You have to use a minimum of 3. My students are well versed in my annotation techniques. I have videos on that describe that. So just backtrack in the YouTube channel if you want to see how I teach annotations. So the question immediately becomes, as we're looking at a blank sheet of paper or a blank screen, we haven't written yet. All we've done is annotated, located our sources. So how do I write the introductory paragraph? And as always, my tacit response to that is either use the declarative heuristic or the inverted. But there's a caveat to that. You got to Bob Ross your instruction in order for this to make sense and to take it out of the ether. Because, you know, a lot of times we assign writing instead of explicitly teaching, and we're just bloviating into the ether. Kids aren't going to understand unless we get to the proverbial easel and canvas and paint with and for them while manipulating heuristics. Bob Ross was a heuristics guy. He used the wet on wet technique every time he did a natural landscape, and that's how it got demystified for us as we learned how to paint with Bob Ross. And the same goes for writing, right? If we embrace our inner Bob Ross and give our students exemplars and models that we create, they really appreciate it and they grow exponentially as writers over time. So let's break down what the declarative looks like graphically. I liken it to a triangle. And what you're going to do is begin with the thesis, hence the title Declare. You declare the thesis. So immediately you name the person you think the GOAT is. You provide a little bit of context and background, but the one thing you don't want to do is start citing sources. You don't want to piggyback any sources. You don't want to name any sources. Your argument's central. So if you say Patrick Ewing, you got to give a little bit of context and background as to why. I talk about laying the seeds of the line of reasoning. Usually you hint where the body paragraphs are going to go in that context and background. Is an academic paper, so I do want to see a fair amount of tier 2 level vocabulary in there. And what I mean by that is just your average run-of-the-mill SAT level caliber words. In terms of sentence constructs, I got a whole bunch of stuff in my YouTube channel centering around Strunk and White's rule number 18. And in their seminal text called Write It Right, they espouse the idea that there's 12 different ways to cobble together a sentence. And then with those sentence types, there's 20 patterns. So I'm going to do some syntactical ninja maneuvers in here just to flex for kids how they can work at sentence level and some of the choices they can make to cop a nice voice rhythm and flow. And then all of my introductory paragraphs, whether we're doing synthesis, argument, persuasion, research, rhetorical analysis, literary analysis, they are always 4 sentences long. So we can flip that triangle upside down on its head and invert. And in this case, the 4th sentence is going to constitute or comprise the thesis statement. So you begin with that context and background. You drop your seeds for the line of reasoning up top. And then, boom, you state the name of the goat in the last sentence. Same concepts apply. I want to see some tier 2 sentence constructs of flowing and 4 sentences. So let's unpack this and take a look at a few exemplars and models. I'll read the first one through top to bottom, and then I'll explain what I got going on in there. Whether one wants to admit it or not, there are countless moot points within the scope of this debate. Not only does one single player far outperform all of his comparable peers, but one player statistically far outshines all other NBA contenders, past and present. In spite of acknowledging that Michael Jordan does not take home the prize in every quantifiable category, he nonetheless is a once-in-a-lifetime athlete who is the poster child of the league. Stephen Blake Crowder is unequivocally correct in making his assertions. So let's start by identifying the thesis. It's the last sentence. So this is an inverted model. And, with this demographic, a student that's going to tackle this paper, at least in my class, it tends to be the disengaged kid, the kid that I got to coax and coerce into writing essays. And for simplicity's sake, I said this. When you state your thesis, drop the name Stephen Blake Crowder, because you have to either defend, challenge, qualify, refute Crowder's assertion that Jordan is the GOAT. So if you drop the name Stephen Blake Crowder in the first or the last sentence, we're going to be able to distinguish whether or not you have a declarative or inverted heuristic model. Now, the other things that I've done in here is I laid down the lines of reasoning for where I'm going to go in my body paragraphs. So you can see that we're going to go with some quantifiable categories, take a look at MVPs, championship rings, statistics, all that stuff that is common fodder in this debate. And I also, hint to the fact that I'm going to offer a concession in this paper. He doesn't win in every category. There are other characters and casts that have better statistics, but it ultimately doesn't just boil down to raw numbers. So you can see first 3 sentences are just context and background. And then I hit you with the thesis last sentence. My vocab is up. You got words like moot, comparable, outshines, acknowledge, quantifiable, nonetheless, right? Good words like that, unequivocally. And at sentence level, nothing parallels. I think that's the key thing for sentence constructs. And teachers and students sometimes get confuddled with that because they're like, I don't know Rule 18. I don't have that book. I don't know how to teach it. So my simple rule is this. Don't parallel. Pay attention to the sentence you just dropped and then run like hell from it for a little bit, right? Don't come back to that pattern for, the time being. And in that way, you don't have that da-dot, da-dot, da-dot rhythm, that cadence that students have, especially when they rewrite and regurgitate independent clauses over and over and over again. All right, that might be a little confusing, so let's paint another one. Here's exemplar number 2. Again, try to spot the thesis on your own. Note the tier 2, note the sentence constructs, again, 4 sentences long. Spy with your little eye where the thesis is. Not only are Crowder's comments outlandish, but they are categorically incorrect. The fact of the matter is this: Jordan doesn't even qualify to be considered into the top 5 best players of all time. But like with anything, statistics and data samplings can be misconstrued to contort the truth of the matter to bend the argument in one direction. Beyond a shadow of a doubt, Wilt Chamberlain is hands down the official GOAT of the NBA. Thesis comes first sentence because I said Crowder. Last sentence, I'm mentioning Wilt Chamberlain. I'm going in a different direction. My vocab is up. I got good words in there. And the sentence constructs are a little trickier in this one than sample 1, especially in the second sentence. I used a dash. So my students are very well versed in grammar, punctuation, syntax, so they can use colons, semicolons, dashes. Their commas tend to be in the right spots and all that stuff. So they know like what a parenthetical statement is, etc. So they're all groovy and good to go in that department. So let's do it again. You can do this. It's not that hard. It just takes a little bit of practice. Here's exemplar number 3. While Crowder's been known to make some rather moronic assertions in the past, he's right on the money in stating that Michael Jordan is the GOAT. All right, that's my thesis statement. You see Crowder's name there, so I'm agreeing with him. All one really needs to do is study the statistical bylines and data samples that fuel the debate. Now it stands to reason I need a body paragraph on that, where we're going to take a look at the statistical bylines and data samples, right? Unfortunately, those who champion the cause for players other than MJ conveniently overlook these numbers. No matter how one slices the issue, Jordan is the clear and only front runner. So you got to get into a lot of statistics with this. It's kind of a mathematical pursuit, which is a neat paper for kids to tackle because you got to compare a lot of numbers between a variety of different contenders in the GOAT category. So it gets a little messy, but nonetheless is a cool debate. So I did 4 introductions, so let's paint it back again and take a look at the 4th exemplar. Typically, sports pundits and fervent fans overlook the hard science in this debate. But on rare occasion, these talking heads land upon the essential determining factor: winning championship rings. So I need a body paragraph on that. That's what I mean by dropping the seeds of the line of reasoning. While there are certainly other variables to consider, what ultimately tilts the scale within this debate is the difference between the winners and losers. Crowder, unfortunately, has it all wrong. So this is an inverted. The GOAT is Kobe Bryant, right? So we're going to take a look at championship rings. I can ultimately trespass into other territories. I'm not confined to anything really in particular other than those championship rings. And I'll do like a cross data analysis between a variety of players and ultimately make the assertion and prove that Kobe is the GOAT. All right. If you're painting along with me, good place to pause. Students give a hand at it. Teachers look over their shoulders and share your writing with one another. Still lots of white space left. Got a lot of canvas left to paint. So you got to ask yourselves the question, so how do I write the body paragraphs? And we know that we're going to go with the syllogistic method. Let me give a quick cursory glance through this. In my other YouTube videos, I go over this exhaustively if you want to backtrack in case this is a little nebulous at the end of my description and introduction of it. So the syllogistic method is rooted in the Aristotelian tradition, comes from Aristotle. He ran a school called the Lyceum, and the townsboys would go there to learn about polemics, oration, debate, wordsmithing, word wrangling, and they'd often throw out these juicy essential questions like, what is justice? Which is the whole basis of a seminal text called Plato's Republic. And Aristotle noted that the kids who really house good arguments are kind of calculative, mathematical in their structure of the argument. And one day he had a eureka moment and he said, aha, I'm going to teach this formulaically. And he called it the syllogistic method. And all it is when you go from premise to conclusion. So if I say premise 1, arsenic is deadly, you'd all nod your head and say, yep, Kristian, you are 100% correct. If I follow it up with a second premise that reads like this, my dog ate arsenic, you're all going to scratch your chins and naturally conclude, uh-oh, Kristian, that's not going to bode well for your dog. Your dog's going to die. And Aristotle would call that a cogent argument, right? It's line of reasoning. It's what we talk about in composition all day long. So how do we morph that heuristic and get something for the purposes of constructing a synthesis paper? Well, I got you covered. First premise is going to be an argument containing a why reason. That's going to require some unpacking, so I got a few exemplars for you to demonstrate that. The first premise is going to be a 3-sentence move, and my reasoning behind that is because I want the centrality of the argument, right? I want the student's argument to stay centered. Oftentimes in sentence 1, 2, and 3 of the body paragraph, the kid's already into regurgitating source material. They're dropping names, they're dropping quotes, and I'm like, whoa, where's your argument? I need to hear your argument. So 3 sentences is kind of a safeguard. 4th sentence begins the second premise, and this is where we're going to teeter-totter balance the quoting and the paraphrasing. Right, you got to use a minimum of 3 sources, so I'll show you how to fuse all that in there. And then body paragraphs require conclusions. You just can't, end on a quote and run like hell out of there. So you got to wrap it all back to Crowder. You got to come all the way back to the thesis statement. And this is going to take about 10 to 12 sentences. So first premise, 3 sentences. Second premise begins 4th sentence. And then you need a variety of quotes and paraphrases in there, which takes you ultimately to about 10 to 12 sentences. All right, so we know we got to start with that first premise, but what does that look like? Well, I got some stems, and I'm not a big fan of stems. Ultimately, I want kids to kick the training wheels off and get really authentic and organic and messy with their writing. But if they need it, here are 2 easy stems they can use. And it gets to the reason why, because you say reason why. So check this out. There's a clear reason as to why, right? And then you just go on. There are a couple of reasons why Crowder, and off you go. If you got a single reason, steal the first stem. If you got a couple of reasons, go with the second stem. Let me show you the whole 3 sentences using one of those stems. There are several reasons why Crowder's claims are untrue and off the mark. First, in several of the most important statistical categories, Jordan's not even in the upper echelon of players. Second, the era in which this alleged GOAT played saw some of the worst gameplay in the history of the league. So in the first premise, you got to start laying down your thread for the lines of reasoning. And if you go to where I said first, right, I kind of enumerated this for the reader. We're going to take a look at statistical categories where Jordan ain't even close to being up top, right? So I got to have quotes and paraphrases for that. And then second, I'm going to make the argument that the 90s were like, so that was some bad playing, which I totally disagree with. I was a 90s child, so I thought the 90s were great for the NBA. But just for the sake of demonstrating, I'm going to go that angle. So I need quotes and paraphrases for the promise of the first premise, where I said first and second. All right, so to recap that, first premise, 3 sentences, drop the why reason. From here, once I'm done with my first premise, I tell my kids to go quote hunting. their first premise is a promise, and they got to keep the promise of the first premise, and all quotes and paraphrases need to be linked to that promise. So let me show that to you again. So here's a different first premise. I'm going to get rid of the training wheels and be a little bit more genuine and authentic in this one. And then I'll show you how to fuse the second premise to the first premise. So here it is from the top. 3 sentences, first premise. The argument boils down to one simple fact. The true GOAT achieved unprecedented results without a single supporting cast member. All right, so I got to have quotes and or paraphrases about the fact that the GOAT did not have any all-star members on his team, didn't have any Hall of Famers or anything, just did it alone. Unlike all other contenders in the ongoing debate, Wilt Chamberlain neither played with fellow Hall of Famers nor anyone who ever made an all-star squad. So that's the promise of my first premise. No supporting cast. Quite literally, every other player in contention of the honor of being branded the best of all time had a star-studded cast of players to make their accomplishments moot in comparison to the one and only greatest of all time. So you can see that takes 3 sentences. Now I got to go get quotes and or paraphrases in my second paragraph. So I got to talk about, like, who did Wilt play with, who's Michael playing with, who's Kobe playing with, who's LeBron playing with, and do a comparative analysis of that. So the support analysis is all going to come in the second premise. So look at what I got cooking in the second premise. So again, 4th sentence, I usually get quoting and paraphrasing. So keep that all out of the first 3 sentences. Get the centralized argument down first. So take a look at this. Take, as a case in point, the 2 championship squads Chamberlain was on. The 1967 76ers and the 1972 Lakers. Statistically, dating as far back as 1955 to the present moment, every single championship team had at minimum 2 Hall of Famers and 3 All-Star players. The only exception being the years 67 and 72. And I grabbed that from source B, right? So let's talk about how to quote and be silky smooth about it. I have a heuristic within the heuristic, and I call it the 5-word rule. If a student places a minimum of 5 words in front of the quote and keeps the quote relatively small, it should sound conversational. Teachers, you will need to show your students how to bracket, though, how to like bastardize those quotes to keep them conversational. All right, so I quoted, now I got to unpack it. In other words, Wilt Chamberlain will accomplish these feats with scrubs and wood-splintered bench warmers, while the likes of MJ, Kobe, and LeBron had cast members to do the real heavy lifting. And that quote came from my source D. If one takes these 3 gentlemen's best championship performances, Wilt has better statistics across the board. In fact, his numbers nearly lap the 3 other honorable mentions. Again, without a single supporting cast member, Chamberlain averaged 59.2 points in both of these winning series. His next closest contender is MJ in 1994 with 28.7 points. So here's the thing. I want my students to do a blend of paraphrase and quoting. I think if you do one far more at the expense of the other, it kind of gets the syllogism out of kilter a little bit. And it would be hard to quote that. So I just paraphrased it, slap source A at the end. That's where I got it from, right? So I read that article and I was able to gather all of that. It's not my idea. I got to give credit to the author. Those numbers are not even close. And then take rebounding, steals, blocks, and assists. Chamberlain also wins in these categories as well by nearly a 3-to-1 margin, right? So I'm nearing my 10 sentences here, but I got to conclude the thought. I got to get it all back to the thesis and the prompt. Look at how I do that here. Even though this is a small data sample, Crowder is 100% correct, right? So you begin with Crowder in the thesis, but the conclusion of the syllogisms also need to go back to Crowder because that's who you're arguing against or with. Wilt shouldered the burden of winning championships as a singular entity without a supporting cast of superstar characters. True GOATs do not ride the coattails of other players and then turn around and tout themselves as being the best of all time. So usually my conclusions take 2 to 3 sentences, which gets me around that 10 to 12 mark. All right, so that's how you do one body paragraph. The question becomes, what do I do next? And it's easy, my friends. You bust out another syllogism. The essay is going to be 4 paragraphs. So my AP kids, for AP Lang and AP Lit, they write 4-paragraph essays. My Regent students in New York State write 4-paragraph essays. It's all that's needed. Intro, 2 bodies, conclusion. So what do you do next in the next paragraph? So you're going to have a 3-sentence first premise. Don't have quotes, don't have paraphrases, have a why reason, keep your argument central. What I usually do in my second body paragraph is get some rebuttals and concessions in there. I teach that explicitly, and usually the second body paragraph is where all of that stuff comes. So change your sources, get some new quotes, get some new paraphrases, shift directions, and go with another angle. So that once you're done with that, you got to wrap the essay up. So the question becomes, how do you do that? Well, early in the year, I give my students conclusion stems. Again, I want my students to be as organic sounding as possible. So early in the year, I'm fine as a scaffold, as a training wheel if they're using these stems, but ultimately I want them to kind of cut the tie on this. So just some basic conclusion stems go like this. Simply said, evidentially, in no other words, when it's all said and done at the end of the day. And it's basically like the grand finale of a fireworks display, right? You're going for the big theme, the big concepts at the end. And to model it, here's one for you. In a global sense, the numbers speak an unequivocal truth. MJ is the undeniable GOAT. Not only did he rule the NBA when it was at its zenith, but he did so while leaving every other player, past and present, in a wake of dust. Jordan is the most elite and the most gifted as far as sheer talent goes. In fact, this is not even up for debate. And again, my conclusions usually take 3 or 4 sentences. And that would be the whole essay. So teachers, students, happy teaching, happy writing. If you need to reach out to me for any reason, feel free to drop me a line at teachingwritingcoach@gmail.com. I'm also a lead teacher for the National Writing Project. We offer PD throughout the entire calendar year. Some's free, some's nominal fee. I present with NCTE quite often, applied practice, and NCTE. I got a calendar of event on my webpage, www.teachinghowtowrite.com, so you can see my comings and goings. And for students, I own my own tutoring company. I call it Write at Ivy Write. I did all of my graduate degrees from Ivy League institutions. I used to work admissions at Brown, so I'm pretty expert on the college personal application process. So if you need help with your supplements, with your personal statements, give me a holler and I can help you with that. I've also taught AP Lang and AP Lit for well over 2 decades. So I'm kind of a seasoned vet and I can get you over that hurdle with success as well. All right, I'll keep them coming as long as you keep showing up. That's the end. Be well.